Learn to this podcast from the Human Capital Institute's Need a Recruiting Roadmap. Navigate with a sourcing strategy. Great hiring doesn't happen by accident. It's a culmination of a series of thoughtfully planned and well-executed events. At the beginning of the hiring process is a sourcing strategy. This strategy outlines responsibilities, articulates the steps, plans for contingencies, and defines success. Recently, Paul Hamilton, Director of Talent Strategy and Programs at Rogers Communications, Inc., discussed the principles that guide top recruiters during an HCI webcast underwritten by the Ladders.
So let's talk about the top 10 recruiting guiding principles. Let's start off, and I want to do this because it's going to help us set some context around source to win. The first one is recruiting isn't rocket science, but the reality is it is a science. And you're starting to see that there's a tremendous amount of investments around, the sourcing methodology, how we capture our metrics, and being able to tie our tactical aspects or tactical transactions to the bottom line of an organization. So it's absolutely becoming more scientific in how we establish ourselves as recruiting professionals and, of course, how we go to market. With that being said, there's also close alignment to marketing, and we'll absolutely cover some of that in today's conversation. Number 2 is use the 80-20 rule, and I use this a lot in my own team, and that is we'll never get to a perfect point, but it's important not to wait until it's perfect until you try something. So if it's at about an 80% point, give it a try, measure it, track it, and then make modifications along the way. It's critical that we try new things in this space because the industry is demanding that. To talk about source to win. What is source to win? Well, source to win truly is just a methodology designed to help the recruiter and hiring manager create a sourcing strategy that is aimed at improving the talent acquisition process. Not a real robust sourcing strategy, but it's a sourcing strategy that works. And we'll look at each element. It describes the key components required to successfully complete a full recruitment cycle while ensuring both parties are aware of their shared accountabilities in the sourcing process. That is source to win. So moving on to slide number 12. Now that let's just set the table here for a second. We talked about the top 10 guiding principles, and that really is about giving some context around how the source to win strategy falls into play. We looked at what source to win really is. It's really just a methodology that we've used to help us align our recruiting activities with our manager's expectations and help us derive the right outcome in terms of sourcing candidates for our respective organizations. We looked at each component in the source to win approach. We looked at the setup, we looked at the outcome, we talked about some of the recruiting channels, and the final piece is educate. The next part of today's session is we're going to do a double click and identify some of these items in the source to win strategy and then talk about how that might relate to your organization. The next item I want to look at is the outcome. The first item is expectations and consequences. Performance indicators must be established with the hiring manager before the recruiting process begins. I translate this to say, hiring manager, if I were to find the right candidate and that candidate were to achieve 100% of their goals in the next fiscal year, what have they done? And then work backwards in terms of, okay, we've got the right person. What is it going to take to get us that right person? And how are we going to measure success? And this is oftentimes a point of conflict with recruiting organizations and recruiting leadership. Again, on outcome, I've added a slide that talks about some of the key performance indicators that our good friend Dr. John Sullivan put in a report back in 2007 where he looked at some of the key metrics that one should consider when tracking recruiting or the success of your sourcing strategy. So obviously performance of the hire. And what intervals are you measuring? Is it 30 days, 6 months, 12 months, depending on your organization? But you should absolutely attract the performance of that employee, not only to the performance of recruiting, but to the channel that you captured that candidate from. slide 20, recruiting channels, recruiting 2.0, and this is a great conversation. There's incredible books out there. Think about the Once You're Lucky, Twice You're Good, The Rebirth of Silicon Valley and the Rise of Web 2.0 by Sarah Lacey. Don Tapscott has a great book called Grown Up Digital, and it really talks about how the digital world is transforming how we recruit in today's day and age. And, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, but based on some of the research, what are we seeing that's potentially coming down the pipeline? Well, there's a few things. There's the future predictions include semantic search capability, so almost like an artificial intelligence way of searching. So SEO is great, always be a place, but in terms of searching, there will be a more advanced approach and application to how we can conduct a richer search experience. Absolutely, mobile recruiting, we are still at the tipping point or tip of the iceberg on this one. I think mobile recruiting will be a critical tool for recruiters and candidates in the near future. And I think in some organizations, in some countries, you're seeing a more advanced application of mobile technology. And of course, CRM capabilities. There's some great tools out there. There's some great methodologies from a CRM perspective, but I think this is an area that will grow more intensely over the next couple of years. Now, talent communities. This is not a new approach to recruiting, but I think it's been branded in the last 3 years as something that organizations that are doing recruiting well, that are engaged in proactive recruiting, have been able to leverage the concept of talent community. And I'm going to use the content that Stephen Chen from IBM created back in July 10th, 2009. But really, it's an organized group, database website of individuals where employers can interact with current and future employees to communicate currently active or future job opportunities. And it's using it in such a way that it leverages automated technology, which enhances both the employer's ability to find fill opportunities with the best possible candidates. So just final thoughts here, a couple of items that I want to share. I think it's important that when we develop our sourcing strategy that it's not a rigid approach. There needs to be that ability and that area where it has the agility to flex with changing conditions, whether it's an internal change or an external factor or changes to your own recruitment team organization. You need to be able to adjust accordingly, so create some flexibility in your recruiting sourcing strategy.